So we're going to start now our Pesach edition of the book of why. There's so many questions, there's so many whys to learn about in Pesach. We could spend a few years just here today together. Before I start, I want to take a moment to thank David Levy, who's sponsoring in honor of the Yortzeit of his mother, Ruth Bas Miriam, whose Yortzeit is when?
28th of the dark.
28th of the dark, just this last week. The Neshama should have an Aliyah, Be'ezrat Hashem. Thank you for making this opportunity for our learning. Let's learn a little bit of Torah together. So there's so many wonderful questions. First of all, you may have noticed we are in the month of Nisan and there is no Tachanun. It is a very joyous month for many Jewish men because of that. So why is that? Why is there no Tachanun in the month of Nisan? This is a simple reason, and that is, if you remember, the Parashas Shmini, by Yom HaShmini, the 8th day occurs when? On the 1st of Nisan. That's when the Mishkan was inaugurated. It's always funny that Parsha arrives at the beginning of just after Pesach usually. What is interesting is that it takes us to Parshas Naso. In Parshas Naso, we have the inauguration of the Mishkan is followed by 12 days of giving. Each Shevet is represented by their Nasi, by their prince, their officer who brings the gifts into the Beis HaMikdash for 12 consecutive days. Although it sounds like it's a monotonous list, it actually is 12 separate days of giving. As a function of that, it was a special day, it was a festive day for each of the tribes in their part in building the Mishkan. That being the case, those are days, that festivity means to say we're not going to say sad things during the month of Nisan. So for eternity, we retain that. In addition, Pesach is a festival of technically 7 days. And the day before Pesach is actually a festive day because it was the day they brought the Korban Pesach. And there is Isru Chag. If you're counting, that brings us to 9 days of festivity around Pesach, 12 days of festivity around the Nisim. So apparently our involvement in the Mishkan is an eternal involvement. And then that leaves us with 21 days of lacking Tachanun because these are happier days, and as a function of having most of the month, super majority of the month, out of Tachanun, therefore we continue the rest of the month is without Tachanun as well. Just in terms of the general mechanics, this is how it's explained in Halacha. Now, you'll notice that the Shabbos right before Pesach is usually called Shabbos HaGadol, the big Shabbos. Why is that? So, the most basic reason is because from the perspective of the regular parishioner, it is a long Shabbos, right? So why? Because if you think about it, you come to shul. Technically speaking, in the old days, the rabbi did not give a drasha every Shabbos. It would be the Shabbos on Shabbos HaGadol before Pesach, the Shabbos of Shabbos Shuvah, and after shul in the morning on Shabbos HaGadol, the rabbi would go through all the necessary things to think about. This is how you do Hagala. This is what you need to remember about Chometz. This is what you need to do about the Mechira. This is what, all the halachas were talked about then, and people would have a review. This is before major organizations and everybody and their brother wanted to send out this list and that list, and this wasn't the day of internet. People would come to shul, and that would be the place where they learned all the halachas and the reminders about that Yom Tov. And therefore, that would be a long drasha which would go on after davening. Oftentimes, they would then go into mincha. After mincha, then if you remember, this is how I grew up. What would you do on mincha on the Shabbos HaGadol? You'd go through the Seder, the Haggadah, right? From Avarim Ayinu. It's right after mincha and Shabbos afternoon. So you'd be coming home from shul really late. So Gadol therefore refers to the length of davening. That's one of the reasons. Shabbos HaGadol, it's a really long day in shul. That's the most basic reason. Okay, so by the way, nobody complain. We have a very streamlined program. We break it up, right? So we have the morning, and we can have the drasha in the afternoon. It's going to be wonderful. Everybody will be well rested and well fed by the time they get there. But nonetheless, that's one of the reasons. Another reason is, and this is the more famous reason, is because this was the day upon which the nation of Israel took the Paschal lamb. So the year constellation was exactly like this year, where the 10th of Nisan is on Shabbos. And so what happens is they would take the Paschal lamb, and all the Egyptians would say, why exactly are you tethering our God to your bedpost? And they would say, well, actually, in 4 days' time, we're going to slaughter it and use its blood to put on the lintels because you're going to all be killed. And not all of you, just the firstborns. Upon which there was great amount of civil disobedience, because the firstborn said, look, Moshe Rabbeinu is batting 9 for 9 right now. Right? Everything he said has happened. And now he tells us that we're going to die in 4 days' time. So therefore the firstborns appealed to the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh said, nothing doing, we were holding strong. And therefore there was actually a massacre. There was a rebellion within the ranks of Egyptians, as the firstborns were fighting the establishment to release the nation of Israel beforehand, knowing all this was going on before. And that all started on the 10th of Nisan, which happened to be that year a Shabbos like this year's constellation. So to mark, we'll call it that initial miracle, we call Shabbos HaGadol. By the way, we say this all the time, we just don't always realize what that means. We say, Lemake Mitzrayim Bivchoreihem. We say after Shema, right? To destroy Egypt with their firstborns. It doesn't say to destroy their firstborns, it says with their firstborns, which means before even there was Exodus, there was internal fighting where the Egyptians were being killed by the firstborns who knew that their death was impending. That's a very fascinating, and that all started when? On the 10th of Nisan, which was Shabbos. Right? That's Shabbos HaGadol. So that's another reason for it. A third reason is because it's the day Shabbos grew bigger. Because if you remember, why do we keep Shabbos? So before Egypt, it was Zeicher L'Maaseh Bereshis. God created the world in 6 phases, and the 7th phase was the day of rest. Well, that was true for the first 2 millennia. But after we got pulled out from the exile in Egypt, suddenly we had another reason to keep to Shabbos, and that is Zeicher Yitzias Mitzrayim. Now this is reflecting, it's not just a day of ceasing, it's a day where God is interacting in the world, didn't just create it, which is why in our Kiddush we say both, right? We say Zeicher L'Maaseh Bereshis, Zeicher Yitzias Mitzrayim. But when did that happen? At Yitzias Mitzrayim, which means that Shabbos itself expanded its sense. Its sense of identity became bigger around the Yitzias Mitzrayim, which is perhaps why Shabbos HaGadol, just before we leave Pesach, is called the Great Shabbos. And there's a fourth reason I came across just this year, which I'd never heard before, which I think is so insightful. And that is, we know that the Torah tells us that you count Omer mi macharas HaShabbos, from the day following the, complicated word to translate, following the Sabbath, right? Which led those like the Samaritans, the Kutim, and later on the Karaim, who interpreted only the written Torah, to assume that it was always the week of Pesach, the Sunday following Shabbos. So therefore, your Omer would always be a very simple thing. It would always start on Sunday, right, and it would always go till Shavuos. It would be the same format each year because it wasn't Pesach dependent. It was the Shabbos around Pesach dependent, because that's what the Torah says. We have a tradition that Shabbos refers to Pesach. It refers to Pesach. Why would the Torah obfuscate? There's a lot of discussions about that, not for right now, why the Torah specifically goes out its way to say a word which is misleading. What's the value of that? There's so many answers. But, be it as it may, one of the reasons why Shabbos HaGadol is called Shabbos HaGadol is to imply that in that same week there is a Shabbos HaKaton, which is a profound observation, which means that Shabbos HaGadol this is the regular Shabbos, but there's a Shabbos HaKaton this week, which is called Pesach. That's what it means, Mimacharas HaShabbos. Right, so it's to emphasize that Yom Tov is also called Shabbos in this regard, specifically this week. Fascinating observation that helps us just get into this. So we pass by these things all the time, but there's so many different observations about it as well. Now, why is that people put out 10 pieces of bread when they search for chametz? Some people think they're only searching for those 10 pieces of bread, and it's a whole fun thing, and the kids, and the flashlights, and the candles, and the bags, and the feathers, and all those things. But the truth is actually you're supposed to be searching for the rest of the chametz, because the bedika is really the capstone of all the cleaning, meaning we're supposed to make sure there's no chametz in our house. We do we'll call it a final audit, right? This is the end of the chametz season audit, which is done on the Orla Bas, or the night of the 14th. That's meant to be the end of the process, and we then do beer afterwards. But why? So if you need to really do a search. So why do we put out the 10 pieces? Some people say it's because of the bracha, right? So it shouldn't be a bracha levatala. The truth is that if you're searching properly, it's not a bracha levatala, because the point is searching, not finding. But the reason, there's a number of reasons which are suggested. One is let's say you don't put out the pieces, and you did a fantastic job this year. So you're walking around the house, nothing. So you say, I don't need to say kol chamira, I'm good. But it happens to be you did not check under your driver's car seat from that time that you were eating on the way to the meeting and there's crumbs underneath and you didn't do a real clean. You own those crumbs, right? So you do need to do a kol chamera because you're not necessarily cognizant of where all those crumbs went. But by putting out those Cheerios, those pieces of bread in those bags, you're reminded to do kol chamera, which now covers you on all the other pieces of stuff that's under the couch and hiding between the cracks and all those kind of things. Okay, that's one reason. Another reason is because next year you're going to say, you know what? Last year I did the house tour and there was nothing. I'm all right. And the problem is that next year there might be problems, which means to say is the 10 pieces are a incentivization to make sure that we keep doing this. That's another reason. And of course, there's a third reason which is suggested. The previous two were the Chok Yaakov, who suggests in the Avodas Yisrael says that obviously on a metaphoric level, when you clean for chametz, there's also the personal refining process which is supposed to be being undergone. And if you've ever met a person who says, I'm perfect, that's a sure sign that they're not perfect. Right? So some people don't say that, they just act like that. But the point is, when it comes to searching for character refinement, when it comes to searching for chametz in our character, we're never done. So we make sure to put things out to remind us we're never done. Okay, just so if in case anybody looks like they feel like they're done, it's a reminder we're never done. Okay, there's yeah. What was that? Oh, so there's a good question about 10. So there's you get a lot of Kabbalistic ideas here. The 10 Makos, the 10 Mamoros, Kadosh Baruch Hu created the world, the 10 Spheres. There's a lot of I don't know why specifically like this. In some houses today it's too few, right? In the old days there was only one room in the house. So I don't know if there's how this works. Okay, there's another interesting thing. Do you notice that on Erev Pesach you do not say Mizmor LeTorah? That's an interesting thing on the Siddur. If you look in your Pesukah Zimra, you don't say Mizmor LeTorah. Why is this? So that's the 100th kapitel in Tehillim, and the reason is because it reflects a korban which was brought in times of the Beis Hamikdash called the Korban Torah. The Korban Torah was a sacrifice which was brought when a person went through a harrowing experience in life. Right? Kol hachayim yodu chasel hachayim refers to 4 situations. A person, God forbid, who was imprisoned, who was sick, who went through a desert, who traveled through the sea. Those people would bring a Korban Torah in the Beis Hamikdash. Associated with that Korban Torah would be 40 loaves of 4 different categories of bread. And most of them were actually matzos or rikikim, but the one category was machalos, which were literally loaves of bread. And you had a specific period of, I think it is a day and a night there was just this week's parasha. To complete eating them. The problem is that if you were to bring a korban Torah on Erev Pesach, you would not be able to consume that because you at the Zman Biur on Erev Pesach you cannot eat the bread anymore, which means you would not be able to bring a korban Torah at the times the Beis Hamikdash was existent. Reflecting that, therefore, we lift the Mizmor LeTorah on Erev Pesach because we would not have been able to legitimately bring a korban Torah in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. Which obviously means that you don't say Mizmor LeTorah during Chol HaMoed Pesach as well, right? It's not just about Erev Pesach, it's also about on Pesach as well, so it goes all the way through as a function of the same thing as well. Why is it that people refrain from work on Erev Pesach from Chatzos? Now, let me just qualify for a second. Did you know that people are refrain from work? Which means that if a person has the flexibility, which is not always the case, especially because there's Yom Tov and Chol HaMoed coming up, right? But let's say a person is a business owner, or a person has flexibility, a person has hours. Technically speaking, a person should stop working at midday on Erev Pesach, which is around 1-ish, depending on the time of the year. Okay, why is that? So the reason is because actually there is a festival on Erev Pesach from midday onwards, because that is when they brought the Paschal lamb, the Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach was brought Bein Ha'arbaim, which means in the afternoon. If you listen to the Mishnahs, it's amazing. The Mishnahs describe how there would be waves of people coming to the Beis Hamikdash. It wouldn't be everybody, but it would be representatives of everybody. Because remember, a Korban Pesach is a lamb, and it would have to be completely eaten by morning, which means that you need to have groups. So probably have groups of 20, 30 people who would eat together, and that would be the Minuyav, the group of people. They would buy a Paschal lamb. They would send somebody to the Beis Hamikdash to sacrifice that. But there were so many somebodies that they would have to have 3 waves of people coming into the Beis Hamikdash, sacrificing, taking the meat out, and then they would go to roast it for the night of the Seder. This is like so it was an entire half-day experience of Korban Pesach. Amazing. So that because of that, therefore, the Erev Pesach has its own festive quality. So just a few interesting applications there. One is work. The other is hair cutting. Most people aren't aware of this. You should not be cutting your hair after Chatzos and Erev Pesach, which means for all the men who are trying to prepare for the longest possible shave lasting, that means to say you should do it around 12 o'clock on Erev Pesach, because if you miss it, you're out. I've missed it a number of years, where you're like, I'm sure it's 2 o'clock. I'm sure that if I look at it at an angle, no, it doesn't work like that. So for Erev Pesach from Chatzos onwards is a time where you're not allowed to cut hair. You're not allowed to cut nails. Too, same thing. So just because it has its own festive quality, just an important reminder, as a function of the fact that it was a special time, and Be'ezras Hashem, it will be a special time when we go back to the Beis Hamikdash. That's on Erev Pesach. Okay, let's go a little further. Why is the holiday called Pesach in the first place? This is a pretty simple one, because the Torah tells us and says that Kosh Baruch Hu says, Hashem, and the way we translate it naturally is the name of the festival, which is Passover, right? Hashem passed over. The truth is that it's not necessarily there's a few ways to translate that word, right? Because it's not so clear what is going on then. Because technically speaking, Hashem was not doing the killing, right? Hashem sent out the mashchis. Hashem sent out a destructive entity which was killing all the people in Egypt, all the firstborns. So what does Pesach mean then? Because Pesach can't mean he's passing over, because he's not the killing agency. He's the protection agency, right? So actually, so Rav Meidan, excellent, very good. Thank you, Michael, for using this article to me like 12 years ago. Is that Rav Meidan has Rav Yaakov Meidan from Gush has a very fascinating observation, where he says, if you look at the words that Eliyahu says at Har Carmel, he says to Bnei Israel, Ad Mosai Atem Posachim Al Shnei HaSeifim. So he says to the nation of Israel, you're hedging. You can't serve Baal and you can't serve Hashem at the same time. It's internally contradictory. The word he uses is Poschim. That does not mean passing over. That means that you're hovering, right? How can you hover over both service of God and service of Baal? That's what he's observing. Which means the word Pesach really actually means to hover, which means to say that Hashem was present and protecting Israel while the plague was everywhere else. Which means that Hashem, so perhaps Passover is a mistranslation of it. It's Hashem's presence rather than his absence, right? Because Passover means he's not there. It actually means he's there, which is just a very profound way of re-understanding the word Pesach, which is profound. It should be noted that there's another name of this festival, and that's called Chag HaMatzos, the festival of Matzos. Actually, technically speaking, if you look in the Torah, the name of the 7-day festival is really Chag HaMatzos. The name of the festival in Erev Pesach we were talking about a moment ago, which is when they brought the Korban Pesach, is called Pesach. So technically speaking, almost always in the Torah, Pesach refers to from Chatzos on the 14th till the night, and Chag HaMatzos refers to from the night till the next 7 days, because of the festival of unleavened bread. Just to understand the differences, we today merge the two, right? So the festival in the Yom Tov davening we say Chag HaMatzos, and we call it Pesach, right? We call it Pesach, but really, technically speaking, they're slightly different. One observation which is made in terms of the names is that it depends which perspective you're looking at. If it's from the perspective of the Almighty, Hashem says, Pesach, look what you did for me. A great threat to life and limb. You sacrificed their gods. And then we say, Hashem, Chag HaMatzos, right? You brought us out and allowed us to have the unleavened bread. So it depends which perspective, but nonetheless, the name is really significant in and of itself. Okay, let's go a little further. Okay, so why are we so hard on chametz? Like chametz is like, we really like the worst thing for a Jew is anything leaven around Pesach, and the pet food, and the Cheerios, and the mixtures, and the alcohol, and we're selling, and we're flushing, and we're giving away, and we're eating, and like it's so. Why is it so intense? So there's a few reasons. Is first of all, just halachically speaking, the mechanism is that chametz is aser b'mashehu. Chametz is not like your regular treif things. Regular treif things, if it falls in, by mistake, a drop falls in, and then you have what's called bittul. And there's notions, there's different bars of bittul, but the technical one in 60, 1 in 100, 1 in 200 they are. But mashu means afilu be'elef lo batil, which means there's no bittul for chametz. No amount of chametz is negligible. The reason for that is chametz is what's called a davar sheyesh lo matirim. What does that mean? That in halacha there's certain things which are never subject to bittul. One of them is something which, if you wait, it is mutar. Chametz is not inherently problematic. It is specifically time-bound problem. Right? Meaning on these 7 days, it's a problem. 8 days in the diaspora. Which means if you wait, it's totally mutar. Which is why during the period of Isur, there's absolutely no bittul whatsoever. Which is why you have to be so careful. Chametz much more than anything else, because you do need to clear out. Certainly on eating areas, you need to make sure there's no crumbs, and you also know absorptions in any of the areas you're using with heat, like counters, like stoves, right? Those are things where it requires a lot of care, because I feel batel. In addition, chametz is different to regular treif in that it is asur behana. You're not allowed to gain pleasure, benefit from it, which means that's why, technically speaking, you can't feed your pets chametz. I gave my pet food to my non-Jewish house help. That is not enough, because your pet is still benefiting. You are benefiting because your pet is eating chametz on Pesach. It is asur b'hana. There's only two types, or there's a few things, but the most regular ones that we bump into, which are asur b'hana, is meat and milk, and chametz on Pesach. All other treif is mutar b'hana. You can give your regular dog food is treif, right? It's treif meat. You can benefit from it, but not on Pesach. So just it has these more qualifications. Now, part of the reason is also because time is so sensitive on Pesach, which is that the chametz is leaven, the leavening process. We were, as the Yismach Moshe points out, we were on the 49th level of Tumah. We could not wait anymore. We needed to get out. We were at such a depraved level of morality. We needed to go, so we can't even wait. There's not even any time. Any amount of chametz is intolerable, metaphorically, as well. Okay, and there's lots of other reasons. Chametz is arrogance. Chametz is rise. This are shebe issa. It's the yesara. There's a lot of other reasons which are imputed here as well. Why is matzah so important? Unleavened bread. So the reason is because the Torah tells us. The Torah tells us for 7 days or for the night of the first day you need to eat matzah. There's a little bit of there's a contradiction as to how long we must eat matzah. But fascinatingly, actually matzah represents two separate things which are opposites. So on the one hand, it's called lechem oni. It's the poor man's bread, right? So it's the bread of the slave who just doesn't have their own time, doesn't have their own quarters. They're kind of like, have you ever gone and made pittas? Have you ever done pitta making? There's a place in Yerushalayim, I can't know what it's called. Just by the Jerusalem Zoo. It's this old ancient land where you do these things. You make pittas there, and you take a piece of dough and you slap it on a piece of metal above the fire, and a few minutes later it's done. That's kind of, you can imagine a few slaves in their lunch break, trying to figure out how to eat. That was all they had. They you take a little bit of water and a little bit of flour, you mix it together, put it on the side of the tin can pot, and you put it off, and that's your lunch. So it represents the fact that we were slaves. On the other hand, it also is kibi chibazon, because we rushed out, which means that we were becoming free, but there wasn't time to even cook our bread. So this is the bread of excitement, of leading, so which means it's two separate things, which is fascinating. The Seder actually emphasizes both. At the beginning of the Seder, it's halach ma'anya. At the end of the Seder, matzah shulma, we quote the pasuk of ki chibazon. It's the bread of affliction, it's the bread of freedom at the same time. There's a transition in its metaphor, even in the night of the Seder itself. So it itself has really dual meanings. Very fascinating, right? In terms of what it is as well. What is interesting is, historically speaking, I read a book called Salt, the World History. Again, it was a little dry. It did take effort to get through, but it was really fascinating. I didn't realize how many wars were fought over salt mines. Anyways, and just read it. David, you gave me that book, right? Thank you. David's my book recommender. He makes me educated. So it was really, really fascinating book. But one of the interesting things is that just amazing is that many scholars actually associate ancient Egypt with the country and origin of the place of origin of the technology of leavening, right? Which means the notion of taking flour and water and putting them together and leaving them adding yeast to exacerbate the process of the fermentation of the bacteria, which is going to release the gas, which will actually cause the process of leavening, and then to bake it afterwards. That was actually a technology which was invented in Egypt, which can make a lot of sense then. If Hashem is saying, leave behind all leavening, that makes sense then, right? Meaning now it makes sense. We're leaving behind the technology of Egypt itself as we leave, which is such a profound observation.
We're looking for bakers in Mitzrayim, Alexander Rosh of Mitzrayim.
There you go, exactly. So it makes sense, right? Exactly. That's a very interesting observation there as well. Another just interesting piece is, metaphorically speaking, the Maharal points this out, is that ultimately those two themes of servitude and freedom are actually very closely related, because you think about it from the following perspective. We think that we in today's Western culture, right, are so free, right? We think we're so free, right? As opposed to the backward Eastern world as well. Like I'll do it perhaps in a rather jarring sense. I remember there was a cartoon that I saw a number of years ago of a Muslim woman looking at a Western woman on the beach, right? And the Western woman looks at the Muslim woman and says, wow, what a male-driven chauvinistic society, nothing uncovered except for her eyes, right? And so the Muslim woman is thinking, wow, what a male-driven chauvinistic society, nothing covered except the eyes, right? And and so we need to say, what makes a person free? So we think the ability to do anything gives us freedom, right? But ultimately, in a certain sense, that means to say is that we therefore are stimulated by any stimulus around us is causing us to act, because we have that freedom. Meaning, therefore, we in a certain sense are subject to whether it's entertainment or whether it's exigencies in society or things that are going on around us. We're not really in control of our lives to a large degree. It doesn't make a difference whether you live in the West or the East. If we're responding in a Pavlovian way to what's happening around us, we're not free. Freedom is the simplicity to be able to act, not react, right? So the way the Maharal describes this is that freedom is actually shedding all the other stimuli in our lives, which means to say not having anything else, no other ingredients. Matzah is the simplest formulation of bread, right? It's water and it's flour and it's not even thyme. No eggs, no sugar, no cinnamon coating, no crumbs. It's just the most basic form. When we want to get down to who we are, freedom is shedding all the other things that make us do things. I'm doing what I'm doing because I'm choosing, not because I'm responding. That's what freedom is. So we have to reflect on that as well. Why is matzah so expensive? Now, we in the shul try so hard to make sure we used to get from a very, very expensive source, which is only going upwards. I believe that they're at $80 a pound now. We're no longer selling from that vendor. We've gone to the Ukraine and Israel to find our matzahs to make them more reasonable. But let's be honest, it's still very expensive, right? It's not like the gas prices, but the gas prices are catching up these days. And so you wonder, why is it so expensive? The answer is labor. Because the Torah tells us, Shmartem es hamatzos, you should guard the matzah. That's called matzah shmura. There's a debate in the Gemara, when does that occur from? When are you supposed to guard the matzahs? Is it mishas ketzira, from the time you harvest it, or is it mishas tchina, from the time that you grind it? So we actually paskin that it's from the shas ketzira, but b'shas adchak you can rely on from the time of grinding, which means that most of the matzah we're buying, you'll see on the box it says matzah shmur mishas ketzira. You can actually see it written on the box because it's going like this. And what does that mean? Just to understand what that means. So that means to say is that the matzah grain, it's a whole process. The matzah grain is harvested while it's still slightly green, because they don't want it to be fully yellow, because then the rain, let's say it rains, and perhaps even some of the ears of the grain could start fermenting on the stalks. So the fields are observed, and they're cut at a specific time. Then when it comes to the storage, it's complicated. What do you do when you take that grain? So you take it in the combine harvester, you bring it back, and now you need to grind it. So there needs to be that the machine which is grinding it is also clean between grinds, right? Making sure there's no moisture on the machine. On a regular run for grain doesn't really make a difference, but for us we don't make sure that there's not even a small part that is going to be rising. Then when it comes to the sacks, how is the storage? Not too many sacks piled up because of excessive heat. No exposure to moisture, temperature-controlled areas where it's being transported, and let's say it was left, there was dew or there was rain, right? Then you have to disqualify those sacks. This is just the flour, right? We're just in the flour stage. Then when you get to the matzah bakery itself, you have to have different types of water. It's what's called maim shelanu, which does not mean our water, it means water that rested. So what you do is you have to have water which has been drawn the night before and left overnight because it allows it to cool down. So the water should not be warm in any way. It has to be in a room where there's no direct sunlight. It's not just because it's Brooklyn, but it has to be a room where there's no direct sunlight, so there's an extra heat which is being added to the process. The flour and the water are stored in separate containers. So anybody who's been to matzah baking, there's actually different rooms in which the flour lives, and there's a different room in which the water lives. So they should never meet. The only way they ever meet is what happens is that the window is open from the one room to put in the flour, and the window then is, after that window is closed, another window opens to the next room to bring in the water. The clock starts 18, and then it's mixed. It is nilosh. It's kneaded. It's divided into circles. It's flattened. It's rolled. It's inspected, and then holes are placed in it. It's placed over a stick, put in the fire. It lasts in the fire for around 10 to 20 seconds because it's so thin. It's already finished by that time, and it's taken out. All the matzahs which have bends or wrinkles in them are thrown out because in the wrinkle maybe there's a little bit of flour that wasn't fully burnt, and if you understand, all these little details require a huge amount of human effort. You're paying for the human labor. That's what's happening all the way, because it's not just that we went to the store and bought flour and put it into a machine. It's much more complicated than that, and that's why it costs a lot of money, depending on what the costs of labor are and the level of oversight. Right? The cheaper it is, usually it means less labor cost or less oversight. Just understand what, or in some cases less expertise in the thickness. That's also another component, which is why some are very expensive, because of who's doing it and how they're doing it as fast as possible. Okay, why are there 3 matzahs of the Seder? So the most basic level is you need 2 for lechem mishnah, right? You need 2 for the lechem mishnah, and then there's going to be the 3rd one for yachatz, which gives us our 3. But then there's all the metaphors as well. There's Aram Yisrael Yaakov. There's Kohen Levi Yisrael. The Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov one is fascinating in the sense that you break the middle matzah, but we'll get back to that in a second. Okay, why the 4 cups of wine at the Seder? Everybody knows this because there are 4 languages of Geula, which are described at the beginning of Parshas Va'era. That is wonderful. However, there are a bunch of explanations as well, which are the Bnei Yissaschar, the Rav Tzvi Elimelech of Dinov, actually observes that these are the 4 things the nation of Israel did to deserve Geula. So they didn't change their clothes, names, their language, and they didn't speak. There's different language options in the Midrash, that either there was no immorality, no intermarriage, or that they didn't speak Lashon Hara about each other, right? So these are 4 things, and he parallels how each one relates to each of those cups. So it's about what we did. The most fascinating explanation, I think, is the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says that it relates to the 4 cups of Pharaoh. What's the cups of Pharaoh got to do with anything? If you go into Parashas Vayeshev, you'll see that the Torah describes that the interpretation of the dreams of the butler, Yosef mentions the word kos, paro, 4 times. So we therefore have 4 cups. And you say, that sounds interesting, but why does that got to do with our Seder? So it has a lot to do with our Seder in the sense that actually it leads us to the next question, which is, why are there 2 dippings at the Seder? So you say, so the children should ask. And then the children say, so what's the answer? And at that point in time, you need to actually have an answer to the question. So what is the answer to the question? So there's a beautiful observation which is made, which is that it frames the story of Exodus, because the first dipping is the dipping of the coat of Yosef in the blood, which the brothers used as an alibi to implicate a wild animal. That's the first dipping, which is the karpas at the beginning of the Seder. The second dipping of the maror in the charoses, which is at the end of the Magid piece, is actually relating to the dipping of the hyssop, the azov, in the blood to paint on the lintels, which is the end of the Exodus process, which means Magid is framed by the dipping which led us into slavery and the dipping which led us out of slavery, right? So that's sort of seen as throughout time, those are the 2 dippings. The two of course, are related because the reason we got down to Mitzrayim was because we sold our brother, right? We had a fight and we sold our brother. We sold him down. That led to him actually succeeding, putting the rest of the family down to join us in his summer vacation area called Goshen, and then ultimately that turned into slavery, and things went south from there. But which means to say is, you want to understand how we got into this mess. It was because we made a mess for ourselves, right? So that there's outside actors, but there's internal actors who, and therefore coming back to the previous question, is why is the koshel para? Is because actually the Yosef's relationship in Egypt is in fact a critical piece of the puzzle of how we arrived in Goddess itself. Really just fascinating as well.
One thing about the karpas, I don't know if you're going to mention
Yes.
it says in the Megillah, chol karpas, it's like a cloth.
Yes, 100%. Thank you so much. Yeah, I meant to mention that. Rashi actually says that the multicolored garment of Yosef was called, well, one of the materials was karpas. Rashi says in Parshas Vayeshev, which is karpas is a material, which makes sense, which is why we're dipping the karpas, which is the actual clothing of Yosef in the. Just fascinating. So many amazing things. Okay, let's go a little further. Why do we say halach ma'anya in Aramaic? Like most of the Seder is in Hebrew, right? Why is halach ma'anya in Aramaic? So the reason is, I saw just an observation of the Menachem Tzion, which is so profound, which is you can't do halach ma'anya if the Beis Hamikdash is around. Why? Because the Korban Pesach is only onecha liminuyav. You need to be invited, meaning you, by the time the Korban Pesach is sacrificed, it's assigned to all the group, right? So it's too late to offer for guests. And by the way, on the night of Pesach, it's also a little too late if you're thinking about guests at that point in time. But the point is, we say halach ma'anya to invite people in, to emphasize that there's an absence of the Beis Hamikdash, right? Because you can invite people in at that point in time, implying that now in a certain sense, we are no longer in the space and state of the Beis Hamikdash, which is why it's in Aramaic, because it's a exile language to emphasize the Shana Haba Yerushalayim. That's how we start the Seder. We start and end the Seder with essentially saying Lashon Haba Yerushalayim. This Pesach Seder is deficient. There's many other reasons, but I thought this one is a really fascinating one as well. A few other things. Why do we hide the Afikoman exactly? So the one reason is to get the kids involved. Actually, in Halacha it actually says that to get kids involved. Now, whether it is that your kids steal it from you and hide it, or whether you hide it and they have to search for it, there's no question this keeps the kids involved all the way through, because they're going to want to be involved, and the incentivization of our gifts is in order that they are involved. It's just an educational tool, which is fascinating. Happens to also be that it also is, right now, acts as a representation of the Korban Pesach, right? Ein maftirin achar Pesach afikoman. Afikoman literally means a dessert. So we eat this piece of matzah reflecting the Korban Pesach, which is why we eat a kazayas of it. Yeah, we've had a lot of kazayas that night, right? So we eat that kazayas as a reflection of the Korban Pesach itself. But just metaphorically speaking, there's many, many beautiful observations. One is made by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, which is that every person grows up, and as they're a child, they have a certain sense of naivety, wonder, curiosity, and innocence about the world. And as they grow up, they get jaded, and they get put in their place, and they get cynical because they just see real life. And life can be so complex and so complicated. But what hidden in each of us is a little tzafun. Hidden in each of us is a little piece of that child that once was, that still wanted to dream and still was curious to ask questions. And in a certain sense, sometimes our children, sometimes our grandchildren, are the ones who are able to find that piece of us again at the end, right? Even though we're older and it's later, help us rediscover ourselves a little bit as well. Just a profound observation in terms of the role of children. It's not just that we need the children to be involved, it's we need to find our children, which is why perhaps I think even a adult should ask Manishtana if there's no children around, is that we still deserve, we owe it to ourselves to be the children we once were at some point in time. Now, why are romaine lettuce used? They're not bitter. I mean, it's having a salad, right? So it's why? So we always said, ours is the men's remaro, the ones that make you red in the face and start steaming out the air. No, so that's the chazeres. Why is romaine lettuce is used? So it's not really bitter. So one of the observations is that if you leave it in the ground long enough, it becomes it becomes bitter, right? So it turns bitter if left in the ground. Still doesn't explain why you're eating it while it's not bitter. But another observation is it's not about its taste, but rather its texture. The Aruch HaShulchan says that it's soft on the outside and it's hard on the inside, which is how our exiles always begin. We get to a new country and they love us, yeah, and they're so good to Jews, and we just need to learn the language, go to the schools, and they will accept us so much. And then October 7th happens and you realize, not so much. They don't really love us so much. And so the hardness is that's how it worked in Egypt too. Is we started off and everything was fine, and family of Joseph, so nice. Economy, Jews, fantastic, good for the economy and everything. And then after a while, it's like they were in the ditches digging, So like it sometimes it's the hard realization which happens. It's the texture of the marrow itself as well. Okay, interesting observation. Why is it? And tell me, just curious, to show of hands, how many people have eggs at the Seder table? Okay, good. So good. Why? So very cool. So it's always a good break because we haven't been eating so long, right? So if we get anything else, it's always a relief. The matzah isn't always doing it, and so the eggs are fantastic around that period of time in the Seder. So why do we have the eggs? Really interestingly enough, it's actually because it parallels Tisha B'Av. So why Tisha B'Av? So interestingly enough, there's a system that Shulchan Aruch notices is what's called atbash. Atbash is really just a one way that the Hebrew alphabet conveys meaning. Is that it's a letter substitution. You substitute it backwards. So Aleph refers to Taf. It's actually it's a cipher if you want to be technical. So it's Aleph is reflected by Taf, Beis is reflected by Shin, Gimel is reflected by Reish, Atbash Gardak, right? So each At is the Aleph Taf. So why is it related over here? Usually that's in gematrias, right? As an example, just most people not aware of this. Im Lavan Garti, Rashi said Tarig Mitzvah Shamarti, right? Rashi says that I kept the Tarig Mitzvahs. He's using Atbash in that gematria. It's not exactly 613. It's an Atbash gematria. Okay, so we're going to take a look at that Rashi. But what is interesting is why in this situation. So it's seen that Pesach, which is the first festival of the year, because Nisan is considered Chodesh Rishon, is seen as a map onto all the other festivals of the year, which means that the day of the week, that the first day of Pesach occurs, the Aleph of Pesach will be the day of Tisha B'Av. At is Aleph, relates to the Taf of Tisha B'Av, which means this year Tisha B'Av will be on a Thursday, right? Because this year Pesach is on a Thursday. That's what it's going to be. Look in the calendar. Take a look I think it's the end of July, early August this year, Tisha B'Av. You'll see it's on a Thursday. At Bash, the second day of Pesach will be the day of Shavuos. So the first day of Shavuos will be on a Friday this year because it maps after the second day of Pesach. Then you go after the Gimel, Gardak, right? So it goes to each of the festivals, right? Each of the festivals maps after a day of Pesach in the calendar, the way that calendar works. It's very fascinating. You can always work it out looking at Pesach. Interestingly enough, by the way, that always goes up to Vov, but then they always get stuck by the last one, which is the Zion, the seventh day of Pesach. There's the Gemara, sorry, the Shulchan Aruch does not talk what the Zion is, but the Zion is parallel to which letter in the alphabet? It's parallel to the Ayin, right? Just an interesting observation that it happens to be that the seventh day of Pesach will be the day of Hey which is Yom Ha'atzmaut. Just interestingly enough, if you followed all the way through, okay?
The perm is not the next perm; it's the perm before.
Oh yeah, so it has to go backwards. Yeah, so but it just there's that. So coming back to where we are now, on this night, there's a lot of parallels between Tisha B'Av and Pesach. In fact, there's a kina on Tisha B'Av, which is B'tzeisim in Mitzrayim, which is wow, look at the grandeur when we left Egypt, and look at the diminishment when we left Jerusalem, right? So that's there's many parallels between Pesach and Tisha B'Av. One of them is on the night of the Seder we have beitzim, we have eggs, which are a symbol of Avelos, right? And so we have Avelos as a reflection of Tisha B'Av, which in a certain sense to me is also the idea that our Yom Tov is deficient. There's only 2 times a year where we say the Shana B'Av Yerushalayim, and that's after the Seder and after Yom Kippur. And the reason is because those are the 2 festivals which are mostly transformed after the Mikdash was destroyed. Sukkot, you have the lulav, you have the sukkah, it's mostly the same, right? You Shavuos, we have the cheese, and we have the Torah, right? And it's mostly the same. So you have all the festivals, most of them are practiced the same. Rosh Hashanah, the Shofar, but when it comes to Yom Kippur, Yom Kippur was already spent in the base of Mikdash, right? That was where the Avodah was done. we are completely different to what Yom Kippur was, and Pesach was spent with a Paschal lamb. That's completely different. We're deficient in both those ways, so it's the Shalom Yerushalayim afterwards, acknowledging that there's something so missing in our experience today, which is also with the eggs as well. Okay, charosis. Why do we have charosis the Seder? And the answer is because my wife has got the best recipe. But technically speaking, why is that the case? So it's obviously reflective of the cement, right? So the texture is meant to be like the cement. But it's interesting. There are a few interesting ingredients which are there. One of them is apples. One of them is nuts. And so there's a lot of commentary on this. The nuts is relating to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Shir HaShirim, which we read on the night of Pesach and on Shabbos Chol HaMoed, which is El Gidal Say Goy Zeradity, HaKadosh Baruch Hu coming down to the orchard of the nuts, coming down to see us as His beloved. We also say the tapuach, which is why apple should be in the tachas tapuach aratich, which is also a pasuk in Shir HaShirim. It reflects them, as the Midrash describes, the nation of Israel were in a broken state. They were not procreating, they were not having children. The men were completely finished at the end of the day. The women would take them out to the fields, the tachas tapuach aratich, and encourage their husbands to have children. And the only reason we had the future generation was as a function of that. So in the cement itself is the hope of continuation, which is that beyond logic hope that the world will be a better place afterwards as well. Why is there a fifth cup at the Seder? Why is there the Kos Shel Eliyahu? The answer is the Gemara actually has a debate as to whether there is a fifth cup or not. After all, there are 5 expressions of redemption. There's what says to be Tzalti v'Go'alti v'Lakachti, and then the fifth one is Ve'evesi. So do we have a fifth cup for Ve'evesi? There's a dispute in the Gemara. And so therefore, a number of the Vilna Gaon makes observation that we have the cup of Eliyahu, but we don't drink it, and that's because of why Eliyahu? Because Tishbi Yataretz Kushiyos Abayis, which means Teku. When you have a debate in the Gemara where you don't know the answer, the Gemara says Teku, Eliyahu will come and resolve it. So we have a cup of Eliyahu because he will resolve whether we drink that cup or not, which is an interesting way of looking at it. Why at the same time do we open the door at Shvach Chamoscha? It's always an interesting. I always find Shvach Chamoscha is fascinating because the new generation, who's so ensconced in society, say, "Oh, this is so violent, and how could we asking for such things? We're so happy here." And then the old generation's like shaking their head, saying, "Oh yes, you just missed the train." And now the new generation is getting to. But Shvach Chamoscha keeps coming up again and again. It's not the Haggadah; it's a pasuk. We're just quoting a pasuk, so you can ask the prophets, not the Haggadah, as to why it's said. But be it as it may, the reason is that we do the way it's said. That Avodah Hashem says is that there's going to be 4 cups of punishment poured upon the wrath upon those who took advantage of us without accountability throughout the course of history. And so we're saying HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's the 5th cup is reflecting that as well. But interesting enough, it's also the time we open the door because we feel it's a leil shimurim and not where we're guarded. In fact, you don't need to say the whole Kriya Shema Lamita because it's considered a night of guarding. But another explanation is that we're hoping and anticipating that Eliyahu does come that night, which is why we open the door, not because of protection, but of anticipation, where we hope that Be'ezras Hashem, this will be the year that we finally experience the revelation, the redemption itself. There are a number of questions which relate to Yom Tov, but I figured let's stick to Pesach itself now. We'll do a separate one on Yom Tov, which relates to the Birkas Kohanim and other things like that relates to Yom Tov itself. But this is at least a little bit of an entree into Pesach. I'm sure many of this is familiar to most of us, but I'm sure a lot of it is good revision and also some very interesting, unique insights as we keep doing this. Let's live, let's educate all those around us. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Have a beautiful day and a Chag Kosher Sameach. If it is interesting, there